Thank you so much. We're thrilled to be here today. And actually, we have a super impressive panel because each one of these remarkable panelists, we're going to focus on really practical advice, and practical advice in particular, because the workplace has actually changed more now since World War II. And a couple of key topics that we really want to focus on addressing are women leaving the workforce, and not only women, but women and minorities leaving the workforce en masse. And also talking through how and where we work and how it's changed and how we can actually embrace as employers and as leaders more flexibility in how work gets done. And of course, things like social justice. They're now commonplace in the workforce, and they're coming up every day. And what are the expectations that we should have as leaders and employers to play a critical part in social justice? So this is a big topic, so we're going to break it up into three core areas. We're going to talk about creating flexibility in work, building a supportive work community, and belonging as a key to a successful DEI strategy. It is possible we won't have time for Q&A at the end, but we want your questions and comments, so we'll try and work them in during the session. So quick introductions. Panelists, I'm going to ask you, besides your own introduction, I would love for you to also give the bias that you're going to break today as part of the session. So I am Kate Winkler. I am the CEO over at Ruby, and I've seen in the Slack channel, we have lots of Rubies. Hi, Rubies. And we deliver virtual reception and live chat answering services to 14,000 small business customers. And the bias I'm going to break today is constantly feeling like I have to prove I deserve to be in the room and on a panel like this versus knowing that I earned to be in the room. And because throughout most of my career, I was not only the youngest person in the room, but more problematic, I was the only woman. And I am so proud to say that I am one of 4 female executives over at Ruby, where 77% of our workforce are women, 37% are LGBTQ+, 6% are non-binary, bigender, agender, and androgynous, and 26% are minority or mixed race. So let's move on to our next panelist. Bria, let's go to you.
Thanks, Kate. I love that bias breaking down that you're going to be doing. That's awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Bria Starmer. I am the mom to 3 kids that are aged 1, 3, and 6. I'm based just outside of Seattle. I am the founder of a company called Lions and Tigers. We are a management consulting group, and we rethink sort of the entire concept of team structures and roles. So future work is a great topic for me to dig in on. My company is about 3 years old. We've grown to more than 100 consultants, and we help companies like Microsoft and Google keep women, mothers, and other underrepresented groups in the workforce through part-time, flexible, and fractional high-impact work. The bias that I intend to break is that I believe that mothers are the antidote to the Great Resignation. And I think that if we solve the workplace model for mothers, we solve it for everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bria. Georgette, let's go over to you. And Georgette, quick question for you too. I would love to, everyone, Georgette is Dr. Georgette. So would you prefer that we refer to you as Dr. Georgette, Dr. Renati, or Georgette today?
Georgette is fine. Thank you so much for asking. So I appreciate that. I'm Georgette Zanatti, and I am executive vice president for a company called Corporate Class. We've been around for 30 years, and we do leadership training and so forth. I lead the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion practice. I am also a professor at 2 different organizations at the University of Western Ontario, where I teach diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I also do training at Rotman, which is the #1 business school we have in Canada, and it ranks 15th in the world. I also founded a nonprofit called Women Helping Empower Women, and I sit on a number of boards, both nationally and globally, that work in the innovation space. The bias I want to break is challenging our own assumptions that we have about ourselves, and often what we do is we don't ask for what we deserve. So I always say, you don't ask, you don't get, and this is why I wrote my book called, you can't even see it here because of the white screen, it's called Why Not You, and I'm always sitting across from women across the table saying, why not you? Go ask for what you want. So that's my big thing for today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Georgette. And Rasham, I know we're lucky to have you as part of our panel as well.
Well, I've always enjoyed being on your panels, Kate. You know that. This is not the first one that we are doing. Thank you so much. I am Rashim Mogha, pronouns she and her, and I am the co-founder of the ewow, Empowered Women of the World initiative. The bias that I'm breaking today is it's okay to go with the flow, not be a perfectionist. Right before this panel, what happened, and had it been last year, I would be totally freaking out. I would not be in shape to be part of this panel and be thinking, oh my God, this summit is kind of ruined now because we were not able to get Kate quickly as a panelist. Now, it's just part of how we do business, right? It's just how we show up authentically. We don't pretend to be somebody else and recognize that this is part of how the day flows now. And it's okay to take things in stride and move forward without letting it cloud your judgment or your actions from that point forward.
100% agree, because I can tell you none of my meetings go flawlessly. I appreciate that. And Selena.
Hi, so good to see all of you. I'm Selena Meir. I'm the managing director at a software company that merges the entertainment and music space. So I represent women in tech, women in entertainment, and women in music. It's founded by a woman. Our head of product is a woman. It's a really amazing organization. And I'm very happy to be here today. And the bias that I am here to break is that this is not a women's issue. It's a people issue, and that the equality has to happen at home. It has to start there, or it won't happen in the workplace.
I love that. We're going to actually dig into that today for sure. And, but I do want to start with flexibility in work, because another thing that I've struggled with in my career is that work should always be the first priority and always the first priority. So I need to be available 24/7. I've got to answer that 11 p.m. email. I've got to pick a phone call over my daughter who walked in tears, and I should travel on my birthday and my anniversary and my daughter's graduation. And we get into this vicious cycle that make us choose every day to be either a leader or a caretaker. Bria, mom of 3 under 6, I would love to start with you. How do you break this vicious cycle to be both?
Boy, what a tough one, Kate. I mean, I think we're all like head nodding, like, yes. And, it's so interesting because I think as a caretaker, like that is my superpower. So let me break that down just for a moment. I used to work a lot. I mean, 2 a.m. shifts were like how I got ahead. And after my third baby, who's only a year old, so this isn't that long ago, I'm just not as physically able as I used to be. Like, I am getting old. Like, I'm tired. I can't do those 2 a.m. shifts in the way that I needed to. And so the idea of sustainable leadership is really something that I'm studying right now and sort of digging into, is how do we as entrepreneurs and leaders think about this more as a marathon than a series of sprints? And this is an identity transformation for many of us. I'm a first generation college grad in my family. I'm the breadwinner for my kids and my husband. And so the idea of not identifying as a performer and a hustle culture and through grit, that's really a shift that I think many of us are making. And the pandemic changed this for everybody. I mean, we were all sent home. Everything shifted. And so now in the role that I'm in, in a consulting world where people are leaving their corporate day jobs to come into this gig economy, I'm talking every day to people in every single generation, by the way, folks who are new college grads, all the way to those that are about to leave the workforce and still want to stay in. They're all thinking about, what is my legacy? What is the thing that I can stick to despite the sort of identity that I had in the past? And so at my company, at Lions and Tigers, we have a concept. It's called highest and best use. We borrowed it from real estate. And it's a concept that realtors think about when they're going to invest in a property. And they think about, what is the highest return on investment I can get from given the resources that I have and the boundaries that I have? And if we apply that to ourselves, to skills and talents that we have at work, it allows you to really prioritize and focus. And I'll tell you, when you go into part-time consulting, this is the thing that you have to really think about, is what am I best at? Where is my value meeting the market? And the secret to breaking the bias here, Kate, is that really this is about demonstrating and measuring impact. because this really allows us to step out of the cultural context, the discrimination that we faced, et cetera, to be able to perform in a way that is the cultural currency of the water that we're swimming in. So this highest and best use concept has really helped us solidify how we go back and measure and demonstrate our impact in the areas that we're best at.
That's so fantastic. And I tell you, there are days I struggle when highest and best use, when I look at my list and it's so big. And that is the only way going. I just have to start my day knowing this is not all achievable today.
Yeah, impossible.
Rashim, I want to come to you because you work at a larger organization as well. And I'd love to see what practical advice you deploy because you manage a lot of folks with a pretty broad team, and how you encourage as a leader balance for your team.
Yes. So besides what I do for ewow, I am also the general manager for leadership and business portfolio at Skillsoft. So that means leading our product team, our content team, our customer services team, our professional services team to create those innovative solutions that our customers need. And I think it all starts from setting the right kind of expectations with your teams, with your customers, with your stakeholders, with your leaders. It's giving everybody that psychological safety to bring that whole self and setting boundaries. So for example, I typically do not like to do video calls. I like to do conference calls. And the reason behind that is I think differently. I like to walk when I'm thinking creatively. If I have to figure out how does it fit into the overall business strategy, that doesn't come to me sitting at a desk. It comes to me when I'm walking, when I'm able to think. My body language sometimes can be very poor. When I think like this, which doesn't show very well on camera. So I give that psychological safety to not just my team, but also my leaders and my stakeholders to turn off their cameras when they want to. By the way, fun fact, you save about 96% of carbon footprint, reduce 96% of the carbon footprint if your video is off. So if you have to give some data point to somebody to turn your video off, you can always do that. It's also expectation setting about when are you going to respond to people? When are you not going to respond to people? Setting those SLAs are important as well. So for example, I have been a very poor manager in the past. I would send out emails at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, because that was the only time that I would find in my day to really send out emails when I was not on calls. But I realized that it put undue pressure on my teams to be able to respond to me at that time. And I was not building an environment that was inclusive. So scheduling email sends now really helps me. The second thing is delegating, realizing that we can't do everything. So when you delegate, you basically empower others to be able to take charge and move forward. And that, by the way, is a great way to build your succession plan in your teams as well. And then understanding that our energy cycles are different. We all operate differently. I am a night owl. I love to work at night. That's when my creative juices start flowing. That's where the real creative work happens in my mind. You wake me up at 7 o'clock for a customer call, I'll show up like a dead person. Now, I have my team members, though, who are brilliant at 5 a.m. in the morning. I don't know how they do it. But then having that flexibility in your team and allowing people to understand their energy cycles and have those flexible hours really helps in being able to get that diversity of thought that we are looking for in the solutions. And then one last tip that I have that I've been practicing for years now, and it has really helped, is changing my 30-minute meetings to 25-minute meetings and 1-hour meetings to 50-minute meetings. And there's a setting in Outlook. If you don't know it, please reach out to me. I'll provide you exact steps, but it's a life changer because you get the opportunity for a quick bio break, to get a glass of water, and to really think about what is expected of you in this next meeting that you're going to jump on? Because there's so many times we jump from one meeting to another. In first 5 minutes, you just spend thinking, what am I supposed to contribute in this meeting today? And that changes then. So those are my practical tips, Kate.
I love that, Rashim. And I can't emphasize the energy piece, because we are the opposite. I am useless at night. I run all day long until I run out of gas, and then I'm done for the day. I want to talk a little bit, Selena, and come back to you, because I'll give you 95% of Rubies work from home. And we just now opened our office on April 1st, and the vast majority of our workers are still at home. And this concept of creating separation at home and actually creating an opportunity to have balance at home by starting with focusing at balance at home and getting more contribution from our partners, our family members. And I want to hear you talk a little bit about what you're doing and what we can all take away from that to get a little bit more help from the folks that we see every day in our homes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, and I don't say this to sound, flippant. People always say, "Oh, you're so lucky your husband participates." I was like, that's not luck. That was a very clear choice in the partner that I went with. Like, it was like not an option. Right. And so my advice to anyone young is to actually think about that when you're choosing a partner. Make sure that it's somebody who is going to be a partner at home. And if you're already in a relationship, things that you can do are actually like write down everything you do at home, have your partner write down everything they do at home, and look where there's a mismatch and say, like, we have to shift some of these responsibilities around so that our home life is 50-50 so that we can be all at work when we need to be. And you mentioned getting help. And look, I know it's hard, but there is always a way to find somebody. We've had mornings where I've had to call my neighbor and ask them to bring my daughter to school, and they're so happy to do it. And it's not all the time, but there's emergencies, and there's always somebody around who you can rely on to pick up pieces like that. We live in Los Angeles where we have no family. All of our family's on the East Coast. So I've had to really shift around, like who's in my orbit that I can rely on, and everyone can do that. And then the other thing that as managers, whether you're a female or a male, you absolutely have to make sure that you're setting up an environment where both the men and the women in your company are contributing at home. And obviously you can't make a rule that says, the men have to be home for dinner, at least 4 days a week, or the men have to drop off at school at least you can't do that, but you have to create an environment where it's expected that the men and the women are contributing and are, not expected to be at work. And it's really hard. We talked about this with global and with, the virtual meetings. Time zones are just like, they don't even exist anymore. And so you have to be, really careful how you're planning, how you're expecting people to meet. This company that I'm at now, when I started, there's a 9:30 meeting every day and a 4:00 meeting every day. And it was clear that the 4:00 meeting was just way too much for people to handle. And those who don't work well in the afternoon, it just was so tense. And so now it's cut back to only 2 days a week, the 4:00 meeting, and the 9:30 meeting on Friday has shifted. So it's not the entire team. It's just, it's marketing focused, client success, that's irrelevant. That's just how we did it. But I had to change those things around that the founder of the company, who's absolutely amazing, wasn't really thinking about the strain that these were having on people. And so as leaders, we have to be generalists in some areas. And one of them is being able to kind of read the room and the people and where you need to make shifts. And so those are practical tips that I would offer in that space.
That's fantastic. And there have been some amazing, Neha in particular, I'm going to call your fantastic post out, because just even having an email tag of, I'm sending this when it suits me, but you do not need to respond right now. It's not office hours. It's just such a brilliant, simple tip that I think many of us are going to immediately copy. But just a quick summary on this first session on flexibility of work. So we need to make sure that equality at work starts with equality at home. We should focus on our highest and best use of time. We should be flexible on when and where work gets done, and read the room, because everyone's got very different energy cycles, and we should provide flexibility and grace to allow people to really dig in when it suits them the best. Let's move to building a supportive community at work. And Georgette, I want to start with you because you consult with some of the biggest brands in the world about how to build an inclusive environment. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how do you even start those conversations? Because some of the companies you work with, they're predominantly run with a C-suite and a board that doesn't look like the participants in this conference today. And sometimes there's some awareness that has to happen. I'd be curious to how do you engage with leaders and peers to really open up their mindset?
Yeah, well, I mean, it takes a lot of work, I'll tell you that. And part of it is, part of it is education, and part of it is training. And part of it is getting them to rethink what it is that they know, and breaking down the silos. And the other part actually is, there's studies and the data shows that when we have much more diverse boards and diverse leadership, the profit margins go up. I mean, it's just a matter of fact. So we've got the reports that show us this, right? So McKinsey reports have shown us, Deloitte reports have shown. So it is actually better business practice to do that. And so part of it is getting them to see the difference that it makes. And you actually touched earlier on, you talked about the legacy piece. And often when I talk to leaders in organizations, I'm often talking, what legacy do you want to have as leaders in your organizations? Like, what do you want that to look like? And if you think about the business, like, who's your clients? Who do you serve? And so how are you going to actually, think about where your company's going to go if the people that you're serving the voices aren't around the table? So I often have this quote that I use. It's not actually mine, but I use it all the time. And it says, diversity is counting the numbers. Inclusion is making the numbers count. So if you're thinking from a business perspective, if you don't have those voices at the table, so you have to think about who you're excluding. So if those voices are not at the table, you're not making the decisions in the right way. So from a business perspective, that really matters. And so to me, that's something that often resonates with people. So you got to think about the pipeline that you're creating. You got to think about who's at the table for the senior leadership team. Not only who are you hiring at the main level, but then how are those voices kind of being amplified, and how are the hiring decisions, how is the representation, and so forth. And I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about all genders, I'm talking about all backgrounds, and that really, really matters. And so I think when you have those conversations and people have a bit of aha moments, and, I say this, I had a woman call me and she sits on a board and she said, oh my God, Georgette, I'm speaking and there's like very little movement happening. And every time I speak, they keep pushing back. And then she has one other woman, but the other woman's much more traditional. And she said, I just can't get them to move on the dial. And I said, are there any other changes happening? She said, we're recruiting one more. I said, recruit one more woman. And she said, why is that? I said, the data shows 3 women is going to change the game, but you got to get a progressive woman on the board. And that actually does. And the data shows the dynamic changes when you have 3 or more, right? Because that changes the mindset and the conversations and the abilities to do that. So, there's things that we can do.
It's so interesting that you say that, because again, we have an executive team that is predominantly women. And I get a lot of comments that folks say, you get a lot done because there really isn't any jockeying for position. It's we have a problem. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's deal with it. Let's have empathy. Let's have kindness while we do it. And it's very different. It's a very, very different dynamic when I'm speaking with my board, for instance, that's predominantly male. It's very much a presentation of history versus a roll up the sleeves and problem solving. It's such an interesting dynamic. Just the way men and women think is just very different. Roshan, I want to come back to you because you co-founded ewow with the goal of building an equal world for all, and a world that is free from bias. So a lot of these things that we're talking about and the stereotypes. Talk a little bit about why, again, you started this, what your what your vision, if you could get one thing that this entire group takes away, that wonderful piece or nugget that we can live and kind of help ourselves be the advocates for removing bias and discrimination.
Yeah, and Kate, actually, the moment I say my vision is to have an equal world for everybody, people start saying, no, but we need equal. It's not equal, we need equity. And I understand that. And for me, the whole DEIB piece comes before we can get to the equal world. So that equal world for me is that holy grail, that end product of all this activity that's going on. Now today in this summit, we have women leaders from all across the globe. And if they're not present right now live, I know that they're going to be watching this recording. So I want to make sure that our team members who are ewow family members who are in India, who are in Australia, where it's nighttime for them, past midnight, they get this nugget of information as well. And part of this is, again, about connection and community. And that's why really when you start thinking about it, the most important piece is to understand what your definition of success is. Because if you don't understand what success means to you, you're always going to be living for somebody else and living by somebody else's standards. And that is not going to give you the happiness that you need, right? Building in yourself, embarking on that journey of continuous learning becomes so important. That's why we have events like this. And that's why after these events happen, there's recordings made available. And I can tell you that there are still people who go back and look at the recordings from 2 years ago because they find value in that, because they've embarked on that journey of continuous learning and networking, which is so important, right? I mean, I cannot be more thankful for this ewow family that has given me a purpose and has really helped me. And there's so many like me over here in this conversation today. So building that network who cheers you up, who amplifies your voice, who truly becomes your sponsor in the conversation as opposed to just being a mentor or a coach is so important. That's the reason why this ewow initiative was born, because there were voices that needed to come together and we had to amplify that. So that's how I'm thinking, you start building a supportive community around yourself, not just at ewow, but outside ewow as well, right? Or at your workplace. That's why that conversation becomes so important.
And Kate, can I just add? Kate, can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, and I'm a big proponent of like what I call networking up.
Yes.
So I'm just going to say, women, we tend to kind of like network like this, and we need to network like this. And what I mean by that is we tend to kind of network with other people kind of at the same level as we are, which is great. But what we need to be doing is kind of networking our career where we want to go in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. So that means when you're making connections on LinkedIn or you're going to an event, you need to really work the room and start thinking about where you want your career to go and the doors you want to open in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. So we've got to be thinking about making those connections that way and strategically, right? So you got to think operationally who you want in your network. You want to be thinking about strategically who you want in your network. And then don't be bold and make those asks, make like those, the requests on, can I 15 minutes of a Zoom, can I take, follow, if I see Kate, like comment on Kate's posts and say, fantastic, love what you're doing, a few times. And then maybe say, do you have 15 minutes for Zoom? I'd like to learn more about your business, and network up that way. And so that it's not just a cold call. And then that way you're actually growing that. I mean, you don't need 5,000 people. You need 10 or 15 that are actually going to open up your career opportunities for you. Otherwise, it's going to be the same levels of people. And we got to be learning to do it that way more.
And to add on to that, connecting on LinkedIn is not networking. Just connecting on LinkedIn is not networking.
Yeah, you got to work it. That's what I mean. Like you have to actually set up the times, work the room, go to these events, actually steward those relationships.
And that's a really interesting point, because I want to shift now to start talking a little bit more in depth about DEI, because I feel when I talk with a lot of organizations about, oh, we have a DEI strategy, we're hiring, brown people. And I'm like, oh, that's not a DEI strategy. And we have a tendency to focus on only a lens of race when we talk about DEI. And we have a tendency to just start with a mentality of checking the box on the D. And Bria, I want to start with you, because I've actually heard you say that to really be successful in DEI, you have to embrace yourself to be uncomfortable. And I want to get a little bit more about how have you started your DEI journey, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, Kate, this is such a meaty question, but let me take this in little bites. My company, we really were founded for mothers. I mean, that's really the impetus here. Just a brief story is that I was laid off pregnant, and I faced a bunch of pregnancy discrimination and bias when I tried to go get a job. And I felt like there was this calling for work in the middle, especially for mothers and caretakers who were being left out of the way that the corporate system was working. So that's how this business was born. Lions and Tigers was born to facilitate and foster and center those people in our communities, and to advocate for them. And then George Floyd happened, and all of America woke up to a very different reality the next day. And our clients were asking us, like, what more do we do? And we asked ourselves, what more do we do? And so my organization was called in a way that I think we previously wouldn't have otherwise considered, because we felt like we were advocating for enough. So I personally have gone on a really distinct and long DEI journey myself of discovery, as a white leader, as a woman with privilege, to think about what is my role here as a service provider to corporate America. What is my role here? And I looked around my team, and we first started with just acknowledging who we are. What biases do we potentially possess that we don't even know about? What privileges and access do we have? We just spent a moment, Georgette and Rashim, talking about the access that you get in communities. So where do we sit? What communities do we have access to? And what is our job as a result of that? And so we realized that, as a white leadership team, we did not have enough lenses around our table. Our boardroom was not diverse enough for us to make some of those strategies within our organization. So we hired a very gifted DEI consultant. Her name is Kimfer Flannery Rye. She's an extended member of my leadership team now, and she has changed the way in which we work. We do not have a head of DEI at my company. We all hold responsibility for DEI in every one of the positions in my executive and my leadership team. We have a 100-point plan that we are 3 years into now. And we have KPIs across our organization that measure and track the number of applicants that we get from underrepresented communities. And as a result, this has shifted my organization in so many ways. We've always been heavy female focused, but this has shifted our focus to think about non-binary communities, about disabilities in different ways, about lived experiences of the BIPOC community and how they show up at work. Such as, like, how do we think about benefits? How do we think about healthcare benefits for people who don't work full time? What does access look like there? And so as a result, my organization, of course, we've grown very, in a very big way. We've doubled nearly year over year for the last 3 years. We are now 75% women. We are 33% BIPOC, 65% parents. I have a 93% retention rate and a 23-to-1 applicant to hire rate. So we've really cracked the code in building a talent community of belonging. And by the way, we're primarily freelancers. So to have numbers like this in a community that is somewhat disconnected, like it is a fully remote community, but who all come together and are very passionate about this. Now, I will not let go of caretakers. I will tell you that. I mean, we will continue to advocate for a broad set of underrepresented community members. But there was an article that came out last week from Amy Henderson and Sarah Johal, who have found some research that suggests that nearly 74% of our corporate American workers identify as caretakers and are not being counted. And so it is my belief that if we start to count caretakers in our DEI statistics, as we start to think about, as part of our DEI strategy, caretakers, what we will see is actually some of our biggest community members in an intersectional lens of caretaking. And then we will be able to think about policies related to caretaking, such as paid family leave, as flex work policies, as gender neutral leave policies. Those kinds of strategies in workforce, in a workforce where the Great Resignation is pulling women out at a clip we've never seen before. One of the ways that we can think about broadening our DEI lens is to think about caretakers. So anyway, that's a long answer, Kate, to the highlights of we needed help. We outsourced the help. It has made my organization so much better and more thoughtful as a result. And so we're better to our clients and to our community because of that decision.
I love that, Bria. And that brings up, I think, a really interesting point that, Georgette, I want to ask you in particular, because a lot of organizations don't have a head of DEI, and we have a tendency to push that responsibility to HR. And I don't think HR is prepared to do that because they've got a really different role. I would love to have you expand on that a little bit because we've talked about this before.
Yeah, so I'm actually doing a program at the business school in the beginning of May. It's a 2-day training program for HR professionals. And I say I have a lot of empathy for them because if you look at the role of HR, it's primarily what I call risk management, right? So their job is, if you look at the traditional role, it's, to hire, to get people in the system. And I call it's risk management for the organization because basically, you're trying to kind of mitigate all of that through. But over the years, those jobs have been, every time there's an issue, it's kind of gets dumped on with HR, right? So accessibility issues, well, we'll give them to, HR. Issues around all of the DEI stuff, it's kind of dumped with HR, but they're actually not trained to be, DEI specialists. And so we're finding that when I get calls, like our company gets calls, it's usually we're dealing with the HR people saying, well, we're kind of looking, we want you, we're there. But they really don't know what to do. So it's very challenging, I'm finding, for them because their scope has changed. And if you think about, even I'm going to say the last 10 years, HR people are now dealing with, think about COVID. They've had to deal with all sorts of stuff with COVID. They're dealing with, you mentioned George Floyd and racism. Racism has been around for a long time, but it's been really amplified in the last couple of years. And then of course there's, dealing with transgender issues. Not that that's new, but now that's become a lot more common in the workplace. We're talking about so think about all the mental health issues. We're talking about those. Again, that's happened before, but now we're dealing with them in the workplace. And this whole idea about inclusion and belonging. How do you do that? And then even with COVID, we were working from home. So 5 years ago, a lot of companies, maybe in some cool companies, people work from home, but there are many companies that did not allow you to work from home. Now you're working from home. Now you're coming back. Now we're talking about reintegration, and we're all very different than we were 2 years ago. So how do you create these spaces where people now have hybrid workplaces? Like companies, 81% of employees don't want to come back full time anymore, right? So how do you deal with that? And all of that HR has to deal with. And if you think about it, they're not the highest paid employees in the workplace, right? So I have a lot of empathy for them. And so it's just, I don't think they've been given the tools or the power or the resources to do all of that. And so, when we think about DEI, it's such a big, broad subject. And all of these things have now kind of fallen under that umbrella. And it's become a much bigger challenge, I think, than more people realize that it is, because, resilience is now under DEI. Belonging is under DEI. Mental health is under DEI. It's all under that now.
And I think it's important too, is to remember that statistically, most HR executives and employees are women. And so again, this whole is becoming a women's issue. That'll just go where the women are. They can solve this. So again, it's a people issue. It's not something that you just dump it with the women to figure out. And it's really important, that leaders realize that and put this across the board, and that the men are just as responsible for it.
Well, it's also women that are not well paid, no offense. HR people are not exactly paid at the C-suite level, yet somehow think about the level of responsibility you're putting in on the HR people, right?
Yeah.
And again, they're mitigating some very significant issues for the organization. So, to me, these issues should be at the C-suite level, not at that level.
And if it's not handled well, it's going to go public in a second with social media right now. And so you cannot just pretend it isn't an issue.
It's a significant risk issue. That's
And
right.
then
That's
imagine
exactly.
the pressure on those HR professionals to always stand next to the company as opposed to standing next to the employees when that conflict happens, right? So that's another conflict of interest right there in that role.
So
that doesn't allow it to grow forward.
So when I teach my course, I remember saying to my class, I said, well, HR works for the organization. They don't work for the employee. And somebody said, no, they work for the employee. I went, no, they don't. And somebody said, the students went, yes, they do. And I went, no, they don't. I said, your lawyer that you hire might work for you, but HR works for the company. They don't work for, they're mitigating risk. They're nice to you, but they're trying to kind of keep a balance. But at the end of the day, they actually work for the company who pays them. But they're trying not to get into the front page of the newspaper for whatever issues are happening for that company. That's who HR works for, right? They're just trying to keep everything.
I think it's very important for everybody who is either in this summit today or is going to listen to this summit and recordings later on to understand that difference. Yes. Because early on in my life, I think in my career, I made a lot of assumptions about HR and how it's people. Yeah. And and was burnt a few times. So that is a very important distinction that everybody should know. HR doesn't work for employees, it works for the company.
Yeah, I remember saying that to my student and they went, no. And then a week later, the student came back and said, I talked to a bunch of people and they all thought, and then I talked to my mom and she thinks you're right. And I went, no, I am right.
I think that's the validation.
Yes. And I think that that kind of conflicting ask of HR to do both is unfair. And quite honestly, at Ruby, we separated those roles. If we think about, all of us probably now in some form have a customer success team that is there to advocate and represent our customers. You need to have a people and culture team too that is there to advocate for your people and your culture and their belonging and their inclusion. And they're very different functions, where HR really more is compliance and risk management. They are an umbrella under all things. And so they have a very different responsibility. So as you think about how to approach your DEI journey, consider that it is actually a people issue, and it is an issue that really does need to start with awareness and belonging to get inclusion, to drive equity. And then that ultimately leads to diversity. And Russian made that as a very, very critical point.
And I think it needs to be led from the top, actually. It can't be done. Like, with all due respect to HR, they've got enough on their plate, but it needs to be led from the top. And as I think, as Bria and other people have said, it needs to be everybody's business. It's not like one group's business. It's everybody's business.
And this is interesting, Georgette, because I would also add to that too. One trend that people may want to start researching is this concept of ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And this is a bit of a new concept that's showing up in boardrooms now that I think we all should be paying more attention to, which is the idea now that DEI is not simply a checkbox in another department or even within HR, but that it actually aligns to the purpose of the organization. And we're thinking not only about the sustainability of our brands, but also the way in which we treat our humans, and then the way in which we govern and ensure that policies are in alignment with that. So if you think about that concept, start researching ESG, because that's really starting to come up more and more now in my conversations as we're thinking about how do we ensure that brands are protecting both their customers and their people when they're being called now into rooms that they previously weren't being asked to think about. So
one of the things I talk about is moving from good intentions to integration. So not ticking off the box, but not just implementing, but actually integrating all of that into the company, right? Yeah. Oh.
Well, I know we are a few minutes over our time, so we're going to turn it back over to Allie, and thank you all for what a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.